I come to the topic of Indian science fiction, I think I'll have to try to answer a question. Why science fiction? Why do we need science fiction? I think part of the answer to this question has already been given by Madam Sinha. The reason for this is quite obvious. For the last half century or so, advances in science and technology have impacted as never before the lives, livelihoods, mindset, and the entire cultural setup of human beings. The impact has been beneficial at times, adverse at times, neutral at times, provocative at times, but it has always led to a change in the lifestyle, change in the mindset, change in the lives of human beings. And this needs to be brought out, needs to be depicted, especially extrapolating the present advances in science and technology, the future. What is likely to be the impact of these advances, the future impact of these advances on the lives of human beings? The reason for doing so is that when that actually comes into being, when that change actually comes into being, human beings will be well prepared to face it, to assimilate it, and to mold it to the advantage of humanity at large.
Yes.
This impact would be on personal lives, on social interactions, the national setup, and more importantly, the emotional side of the human beings. So emotions is a very human trait, as Darwin himself had put in his seminal book, The Descent of Human Emotions. He has clearly said that emotion is a very human trait. You don't find it in other animals, not even in the advanced primates. So to put this into perspective, if we see science fiction as depiction of future impact on human lives, then the definition of Indian science fiction becomes quite clear. Because the Indian persona is not the same, despite the unification of the world at large over the last few years, especially after the free trade. Human mindset in India is still quite different from those in other parts of the world. And that's why response or reaction of Indian people, Indian human beings, females, will be quite different from what we find in the Western world. And that's where I think Indian science fiction will have to stand out. We have to find its niche.
Sir. Mute other mic.
Sorry?
There is disturbance. That's why I give
Yes,
instruction to all.
Please continue.
Mute all other mic. Mute all other mic.
So if we take that into account, then the question of uniqueness of Indian science fiction will become quite clear. In the last few years, the biological sciences particularly have taken strides, very large strides. They are gone up by leaps and bounds, and is impacting personal, even intimate lives of human beings, and also their mindset. The reaction and response of Indian persona to these changes would not be the same as those in the Western world, because the cultural moorings are different. Your upbringings are different. To give a simple example, definition of family in India is not the same as what we find in the Western world. Western world family is just nuclear. Hum do, hamare do, or hamara ek. In India, the concept of family not only extends to your siblings, to your children, to your parents, but even to other relatives like uncles and aunts and nieces and nephews. In our society, in India, no matter which language you speak, we talk of Mamera Bhai, Chacheri Bahen. We call them Bhai and Bahen, prefixed with, of course, words like Mameri, Chicheri, Mauseri, and so on. In the English language, in the Western world, they're all cousins. The very introduction of the words bhai and behan brings people together, which the neutral word cousin doesn't have. And so we always think in terms of extended families. Our uncles and aunts and grandfathers and great-grandfathers and great-uncles, they're all parts of the family, which is not the case in the case of Western world. And this creates quite a bit of difference. I recall a particular instance where Dr. Dev of the Cancer Research Institute in Mumbai had developed a candidate vaccine against leprosy. And it had come to a stage where some kind of large-scale human trials, clinical trials had to be conducted. The WHO definition for this, when it was given, is that it should be given to contacts. That means if there is a leprosy patient, then the family of that contacts will have to be given this particular vaccine. So that definition of contact was restricting it to people living under the same roof. But if you go into rural areas and where we went, there were kind of, chawls, attached houses, where walls were common between two households. And not only walls were common, but people intermingled very frequently. Now, if those people who had intermingled were as much in contact with the patient, should they be included or not included? If they were included, perhaps the WHO might say the trial is not valid. If we don't include them, then those people were thinking, why are we being excluded when we are part of the family? So these kinds of questions do arise. These kind of reactions, responses do arise, and that they need to get depicted, particularly after extrapolating the present established science to a future. Secondly, one of the reasons why Indian science fiction perhaps lacks recognition that it ought to get in the rest of the world is because Indian science fiction is either Bengali science fiction, Kannada science fiction, Marathi science fiction, India science fiction. There's nothing like unique Indian science fiction. Although all of this should really qualify to be Indian science fiction. And if you want to do that, then perhaps what could have been done is translate all this science fiction into English language so that it gets to be noticed. I had made one such attempt at the behest of the National Book Trust, and it was 30 years ago, edited a volume of representative science fiction entitled It Happened Tomorrow. It's already been mentioned. And this has really been cited and quoted often in the rest of the world. Not only that, but many of the stories in this particular volume have already been translated into Italian, French, Spanish, and many other languages. And that has made Indian science that there is something like Indian science fiction in the world. We must try and redouble these efforts, bring more and more such volumes. And that's why the initiative taken by the Indian Association of Science Fiction to publish such volumes in the future, I think there was an invitation to that effect recently, is to be welcomed and supported by all those who not only contribute, but also love science fiction in this country. Since this is a kind of SWOT analysis of Indian science fiction, I think I should try and state some of the weaknesses that I observe in the Indian science fiction. Quite often, in many of the volumes that I've read in Marathi and those translated from some other languages, I find a kind of temporal mismatch. What I mean by temporal mismatch is as follows. The writer, often at the beginning or at the outset, states very unambiguously that the events that he is trying to depict take place sometime in the future, sometimes even distant future, so the end of this century or even the next century. And yet, the background, the characterization, the general ambience is clearly rooted to the present. They talk about the events occurring, say, at the end of the century, and yet they say there is load shedding, there is shortage of food, there are roads which are full of potholes, and things like that. This is what besets us Indians at the moment. Is it likely to be so in future, say 50 years or 70 years hence? To answer that question, if you look back and see what the state of the state, what the status of the state was in, say, the year 1921, 100 years ago, or even later when we gained independence, 75 years ago. Is it the same as of now? Even in my own life, I have witnessed so many changes which have impacted my lifestyle. For example, the talk that I'm giving in an online fashion, on the Zoom platform, I could have never imagined it even say 20 years ago. The corona pandemic has forced us into this. Agree? Still, even if the corona pandemic had not occurred, this kind of situation would have come about. Not in the very distant future, in the very near future it would have happened, I'm sure. So this kind of temporal mismatch would have to be avoided to raise Indian science to a much higher level and to get noticed. And the way these would be treated, these advances would be treated to the evolution of the Indian society, the evolution of the Indian mindset, the evolution of the Indian nation as such, has to be looked into. The advances that we have, the strides that we have taken in, say, space research. One is talking about even space tourism now. Our scientists are not only transporting, not only projecting, but they are placing in different parts of the cosmos satellites that originate from many other countries, including the developed nations. Not too long ago, ISRO created a kind of record by, in one particular go, placing more than 100 satellites in space in their depicted or respected sites. So what would this do to, let's say, our society at large? For example, the slides that we have taken in space science have already improved to a large extent the way we look at our climate, look at our weather, especially monsoon. Monsoon, the hard nut to crack. There's so many factors that affect it that to come to a very clear, precise, accurate prediction is a tall task. It's so tall. Yet, today, we get cloud pictures, we get advanced warnings of cyclones by satellites, and how this has changed our lifestyle, our way of responding to this. Yes, we cannot avoid cyclones, they are natural disasters. It causes damage to property, yes. Still, there is no damage to lives, or it's very, 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 very minimal. And even damage to property is avoided to large extent. We are able to build structures which can withstand the fury of some of the highest, harshest of these cyclones. Now, all these are due to advances in science and technology. This is what happened already. We already have witnessed it. But these advances are not going to stand there. There will be more advances. And even the impact of these advances, say 20 years, 30 years down the road, is likely to be quite different. And that needs to be depicted, especially from the perspective of human beings, perspective of human psyche for that particular time in the future. And that is what science will be. And if we look at that, if we depict that from Indian person's perspective, and that will be the true Indian science fiction. From this point of view, I think one question that Madam Sinha had also raised is worth looking into at some detail. What are the emerging areas of science? Which are the areas of science and technology that are going to flourish in the future, that are going to take center stage in the future? In my mind, there are quite a few, half a dozen I can mention. The biological sciences, genetics in particular, the CRISPR gene editing technology, which now allows you to tinker with your genome or anyone's genome, is likely to make a large impact on the way we live, the way we operate. For example, over the last few years, we have been seeing a large extent unseasonal rains or unseasonal droughts. And even when there is a normal rainfall, normal monsoon, it doesn't occur at all the places in an equitable fashion. And this has becoming quite a challenge to our farmers. But the CRISPR gene editing technology would allow you to develop climate resilient varieties of many of the crops, staples, and even protein rich crops like pulses, which we need badly. The climate change that is occurring, we might be able to, may not be able to halt it totally, we'll be able to reduce its progress or reduce its speed, but it's going to come and it's going to cause
a
total.
ನಿಮ್ದೇನು ಕೃಷ್ಣದೇನು ಡ್ರಾಯಿಂಗ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ
It's going to cause a
ಅಲ್ಲ
total
ಬಟ್ ಮುಗಿಸ್ಬೇಕಲ್ಲ ಎಲ್ಲೈತದ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಐತಂತ ನೋಡು.
Please ask them to mute their. They're quite upheaval in the livelihoods. But the CRISPR gene editing technology finds a tool. How do we use it or misuse it or even abuse it is going to dictate life of people in the future. Due to the pandemic over the last year and a half, many of our activities are restricted to our home. Work from home has become quite order of the day. And if everyone is talking about the new normal that is going to come, even after we have had total control over this pandemic, that new normal, I think, is going to be revolving around work from home. There are many activities which can be done working from home. Even education is now work from home. But manufacturing is still not possible to be done in the work from home atmosphere, work from home strategy. That is also likely to change because we have 3D printing technology. If this 3D printing technology gets used in a large way and in a very affordable manner, then the manufacturing activity can also be decentralized, brought to the level of cottage industry, and manufacturing can be done at home, working from home. This is a possible scenario that I put for the future. Likewise, so that is another area where progress is taking place at a very fast pace. Already 3D technology has been used in China, for example, to build a whole house So even construction activity may be done employing the work from home strategy. Another area is going to be nanotechnology. This comes from the basic precept that properties of many materials in the bulk state and the nano state are radically different, sometimes quite opposite. And these get, or these need to get exploited to come up with medicine or pesticides or many useful agrochemicals, which will be having a very precise impact that we are trying to do. And this brings me to a possibility that in the future, the nano and the bulk will have to be separated, and there might be insistence on producing certain materials purely in the nano state, purely in the bulk. And I'm reminded of the tragedy that was brought on by thalidomide several years ago, where actually it was a drug to be given to as an antidote to morning sickness that ladies feel during their pregnancy. It did work on morning sickness, all right, but it had a teratogen effect and it led to the birth of several grotesquely mutilated babies and a total disaster, devastation of their lives. Now that led to the identification of why this is happening. And this is happening because the thalidomide or most of the drugs that were made at that time were racemic mixtures. They were mixtures of both the levorotatory and dextrorotatory parts of the molecule, the left-headed and right-headed part of the molecule. And it was seen that one of them was beneficial, the other one was destructive. And that has led to insistence by the Food and Drug Administration authorities, many parts of the world, that the drugs that you come up with, the medicine that you come up with, should not be racemic mixtures, but they should be chiral drugs. Maybe something similar is likely to happen with the emergence of nanotechnology, to the manufacture of many materials, whether you get only nano part, or whether you get bulk part, or whether you get. Yet another area is neurosciences. The man-machine interface, especially brain-computer interface, is leading to a number of changes. For example, memory manipulation. Memory manipulation is becoming possible with the use of the advances in neurosciences, neurobiology. It's also possible to use them to read thoughts of human beings. What is happening in the mind of people. And this might become particularly useful to those who have been thoroughly paralyzed so that they cannot speak out, they cannot tell even the doctor what's happening to them. But with the man-machine or brain-computer interface, man-machine interface, it might be possible to make these thoughts known or give an expression of sorts to people. In Japan, they have already developed what is called a mouth stick. That mouth stick works as a kind of computer keyboard. And the patient who is paralyzed, but yet is able to move his mouth or the teeth, can use this mouth stick as a keyboard to express his or her thoughts on the laptop or screen of the desktop. So many such advances are taking place all around the world. The space technology is also going to revolutionize our lives, not by only of just tourism, but many other ways. For example, today, space technology is being used to identify the movements of wild animals in the forests, or to see how green cover is existing or changing. Now, these kind of changes these kind of advances in science technology that have already been established, we can extrapolate them with our imagination. That's where the imagination would take place. Not that that extrapolation would definitely come into being, but it's most likely to come into being and impact human lives. So that kind of advanced warning is being given, advanced scenario is being detected, the person is empowered to face the consequences of this science technology on his or her life that might affect them in the future. When it actually happens, the person is well prepared to face and encounter this. And this, I think, should form now the core of science fiction. Not only any other science fiction, but most probably Indian science fiction, to give an Indian perspective to the extrapolations that one is talking about. And if that happens, they are talking about the temporal mismatch. That's also a part of this. But I was very pleasantly surprised recently by a novel called All the Way Home, written by Archana Miraskar. That has really, it's a very good imagination, excellent novel, one of the best that I've read in recent years. And she puts forward a different world where humanity has already colonized another planet, gone there, and is trying to find out its roots, where it came from, all the way home. And that new world, new colonized world, is depicted in all the details, very rational, logical details, including the evolved human beings, where those human beings have new physical and physiological characteristics, not only physical, physiological, but even their mindsets are different. The way they deal with their own lives are different. The way they deal with institutions like, say, marriage are totally different. And this has been brought out in a very evocative manner without losing sight that it's a work of fiction. It's not a sort of compendium of advances in science technology. It's a work of fiction. It talks about human beings, talks about their lives, how they affected, how they search for their roots is changing their whole ethos or mindset. I think such fiction should get written more and more, and to come it from, to put an Indian perspective to that, will qualify it as Indian science fiction. And if it gets translated into English, then it will get noticed in the world. It will find its place in the world map of science fiction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Dr. Bal Phondke, sir, our teacher, a teacher's teachers in science and science fiction. Sir, you are humbly requested, if you have the book with you, it happened tomorrow, we will take one photograph for the release of the press. It's a matter of request.
Let me see. One moment.
Now, sir, I
Yes.
have a message to you. I have tried to convey you in several ways. Only one thing is the Dr. Soumya will be joining at 12:30 to release the journal. Please.
I got that. I got. Sir, please.
Are you able to see it? Are you able to see it, Dr. Naule?
Yes, sir. Thoda face. Please keep it inside, side. Let me see your face. Face is hiding.
Oh, okay.
Little bit low, sir. Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. It is in a correct position. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Our principal, Professor Dr. Ashok Tejankar, sir, is here at the very outset. We welcome Honorable Professor Dr. Ashok Tejankar, sir. But before that, we put a note of gratitude and thanks towards Honorable Dr. Bal Phondke, sir. Sir, we would like to communicate that one of our students, Smitanjali Mitkari, has taken the book. It happened tomorrow for PhD research work. And we will share the introduction of 19 authors so that in the second edition, NBT may change and edit this book. Before the keynote address,
It's not second edition. It will be something like 13th edition. The book has already gone into 9 or 10 editions.
Yes, in yet another edition, it will be the precise introduction of the authors. Smitanjali somehow collected detailed introduction. and with your help, we may prescribe this book to the syllabus of compulsory English of BSc graduate students. This is a landmark activity. Thank you on behalf of all the student community. We express a note of gratitude to you, Honorable Dr. Bal Phondke sir. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Before, we are eagerly waiting for the keynote address by Dinkaran Charak. But with your kind permission, we would like to invite Honorable Principal of Devgiri College, Professor Dr. Ashok Tejankar sir, the Pro Vice Chancellor of Dr. Raosaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, and a dynamic leader, administrator in the field of education. A precise welcome speech. I am very sorry to change the schedule, but I invite Dr. Ashok Tejankar sir. Sir, please.
Dr. Novale sir, you can
Yes, sir.
continue keynote address. Tomorrow I will, in the morning, I will give my introductory speech. Okay?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much for your support and your inspiration. Thank you. Thank you very much.
थोड़ी देर आई मतलब
Participants are requested to mute all themselves. Do you have any question to Dr. Bal Phondke sir? Otherwise, we will proceed to keynote address. Honorable Dr. Bal Phondke sir. KK Singh sir, please unmute.
Yes, I unmuted.
Sir, suppose let us consider Indian science fiction as a student, and in the global scenario, what is the place of this student in the world? Where we really stand?
No, but as I said, see, one of the reasons, one of the main reasons why Indian science fiction, although it's quite a strong genre in many regional languages, doesn't get noticed because it's not translated into English. It happened tomorrow, got noticed because it's in English. See, even Rabindranath Tagore, who got the Nobel Prize, it was possible because Gitanjali was translated into English and the world took note of that. If that had not happened, then even that visionary may have been deprived of that rich honor that he richly deserved. So more and more volumes like it happened tomorrow should get published. And that's why I think I welcome the initiative taken by the Indian Science Writers Association to bring out, to print many such volumes by inviting authors to submit their works.